You may be seated. How's everybody doing? Nice. I know a cold room when I see one. All right. I just want to say this. I know we're all thinking it, so I'm going to say it. Can we just say welcome back to Dallas, please? That was glad to have you. Those of you who don't know, Dallas has been sick, had surgery. He's been healing at home on the live stream, and the only one there. And so we're glad to have you in person. We're all in a room together. That is a joke, obviously. If you are joining online, like Ed, I know you're out there. Welcome to everybody online. My name's Garrett Huxford. I am one of the pastors here, and we are finishing our series on evangelism. You're all loving it. Yeah. Okay. And when I was in college one time, we all were freshmen, and we all got out in the yard, and we were going to play football together. And we're like, all right, we're out there, and we're deciding, is it going to be two-hand touch? We're playing tackle. What are we going to do? The vote for tackle happened, and we're like, okay, we're going to play tackle. And this weather starts rolling in, and you start feeling the raindrops, and you're sitting there in this little circle talking to each other, and you're kind of going, I don't know if I really want to, I don't know how invested I want to get in this game of football. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. And so the first play happens. The guy runs my direction. I kind of grab him, and he sort of just shoves my hands off. And then my teammate comes in, wraps him up head in the rib cage, and just takes him down. And I go, oh, we're playing for real. We're really going to do this. And then the rain started pouring down, and we played football. No holds bar. Full-fledged tackle football in blocker, in the rain. You're getting muddy. You're sliding through the dirt, the whole thing. No one's afraid to get touched. No one's afraid to get wet. No one's afraid to get tackled. And it's just one of the best games of football I've ever played in my life. And what's amazing is that the question is not, will you enjoy it once you're in there? The question is, are you gonna actually step out into the rain? You know what I mean? We've all been in this parking lot where it's oh man, I'm getting rained on. This is super annoying. But then there's those moments where you're like, there's nothing I can do. I'm just wet now. You know what I mean? You're like, okay, I'm just doing this now. This is what I'm doing. And you realize the question is not, can I do whatever's on the inside? Will I enjoy whatever's on the inside? Will I like to do it if I do? The question is, will I take the step into that whatever? Will I go through the door? And perhaps you've heard this if you've been around gym rats enough, and they're all annoying to us. We all know that. But what they tell you, because they'll tell you the heaviest thing you can lift in the gym is my squat, but it's not true. What they'll say is this: the heaviest thing you'll lift is the front door. Just the willingness to get in there. And once you get in there, you can start finding yourself doing more things, but it's the willingness to walk through that door. And I think a lot of life is that way. I think a lot of life is this situation where the heaviest push, the hardest thing to get over, the biggest push you'll have to do is to walk in the front door. And I even think that's probably true for evangelism. That you and I are sitting here going, okay, is this something I am actually or willing to bring up? Is this something am I really going to invite my neighbor to church? Am I really going to engage, am I going to get through that doorway? And I understand it. I understand the feeling. I think that, and one of the main reasons is because you have felt what I have felt in this world that we live in, which is resistance. Resistance to that idea, resistance to things like that. And we live in a world where the one thing that you can't ever do is try to convince people to believe what you think, which is, ironically, something somebody believes and they want you to believe too. But, and I think if I could pinpoint just for me, maybe, for myself, what's the biggest sort of doorway of resistance that I feel? Not just a general sense of nervousness, but a specific thing would be a fear of floundering. We all read the story that Paul did last week. Gets dragged in front of philosophers, and he's got all this stuff to say to them. They're going, hey, you believe something weird and dumb, tell us about it. And he goes, fine, I'll do that. But you and I sit there and we go, oh gosh, I could never do that. If they asked me to explain anything beyond the base level of what I believe, I probably wouldn't be able to do it. And we get this fear that we're going to get in the middle of it all and just flounder and not know how to answer questions that might come up. But I got good news for you. Unless the question is, hey, we've got 10 seconds. Do we cut the blue wire or the red wire? You will live to tell the story another day. That day you might blow up because you got the question wrong. But every other question you get, almost for the rest of your life, you can get it wrong, and it'll be just fine. That story didn't give you enough peace as I thought it would. I thought you would, okay, whatever.
Always go with green.
Always go with green, okay. Sounds like somebody's bombed some places before. Just joking. And so, as we finish our series, Reaching the World for Jesus, I want to end where we started. The assertion that Jesus made at the very beginning of it all that said this, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. The Lord of the harvest, ask the Lord of the harvest, and He will send out workers. And so, we've been going through this series, and we've been asking ourselves, what are ways that we can be evangelistic? What are ways we can reach out to the world around us? How can we reach our world? And we've been looking at the book of Acts because the book of Acts was the very first church, and the very first church reached out to its world and reached its world for Jesus in a very powerful way. And we're asking ourselves, how can we do the same thing? Like, how can we kind of copy them and apply it to us today? And we've said these things over the weeks. We said, one, be available. Say, God, I'm going to be okay if you send somebody my way. I'll be available and I'll let you do the rest, God, but I'm going to be available. And next, we talked about what is evangelism, what is conversion, like what's actually taking place in these two experiences, because they're both two sides of the same coin. Like what's actually, like understand the little nuts and bolts of what's taking place in that process. And last week we talked about being able to start where someone is or where our world is or where our culture is, understanding how they think and understand where they're coming from, and start there and lead them to the gospel, which is perhaps the hardest part because that takes some real legwork. It takes some real work to try to figure out how to understand a place like that. And today, I want us to finish up with this mindset that this idea that we started with, which was the first thing we need to do, I think, is change our mindset about evangelism. I said this for the week one, and I still believe it. I think very often we interact with our world, and our first thought is, there's just not a whole lot of people out here who would be turning to God. There's certain types of people who go to church and certain types of people who don't go to church, and the people who would go to church already do go to church, and so I don't even know what to do with these people over here. And I got to tell you something, our piano player can tell you there's not just a certain kind of person who doesn't go to church, because he never went to church until he showed up here one day. He's now playing in the band. Is that a lie, Bradley? No, yeah, you can answer out loud if you want to. Yeah, okay. Next week, instead of take 5, we're going to do 5 minutes of stretches. That's what we're going to do. But our mindset is when we look out there and we go, wow, the field is bare. But Jesus has a mindset that looks out there and he goes, wow, the harvest is plentiful. I just don't have enough workers to bring it all in. I love the way he puts it in John. He says this, I tell you, open your eyes, look at the fields. They are ripe for the harvest. And here's what I want to say, because you've been listening to it and you've been very polite about it, and I know, but the claim that you have the biggest problem with is this one, this entire series, which is there's a world of people out there who will listen to the gospel, who will turn to Jesus. And that's the claim, that you don't know, and if I'm being honest, that I don't know if it's true. But here's the problem. That's a claim made by Jesus Christ. That was a claim made by Jesus. And the reason we question that is because we have felt a very real thing that is out there in the world, and that is resistance. And there is just resistance out there. Leslie Newbegin is a guy who wrote some books in the 80s, and he was a missionary to India, and I've been reading and listening to his book. I've been doing both. That's how much I've been trying to digest this thing. And he wrote a book called Foolishness to the Greeks. And he was a missionary to India, came back to his home in England and started being a pastor there, and went on house calls with this Southeast Asian guy, and he was a pastor at the church as well. And they went home to start talking to people. Hey, do you want to talk about Jesus? And back then people would say, sure, come in and let's talk. And what he realized as he started reacclimating himself to the Western world was that as he and his Southeast Asian friend would go and talk, they'd knock on the door, and a Southeast Asian family would open the door and say, hey, we're pastors in town, our church is over there, you want to know something about Jesus? And they'd go, yeah, I'd be interested in hearing about God. And they'd come in and serve them some tea, they'd have a conversation and move on. And they'd go to the next door, and a white English family would open up the door and say, hey, we're pastors of this church down the road, it's right over there, we want to know if you want to talk about God, and they'd slam the door in their face. And they'd go to the next house, and it was like clockwork. If it was a Southeast Asian family, they'd be interested in talking. If it was a normal Western family, they'd slam the door in their face. And he came to this conclusion and said, perhaps the Western society, the modern Western world, is the most resistant to the gospel of any culture he'd ever seen. And you feel that, don't you? You feel that there's some sort of a resistance out there that you don't exactly know what to do with. Steve and I were talking one day. We were both fans of G.K. Chesterton, and he made a point which was fascinating. He said, G.K. Chesterton, who was a little older than C.S. Lewis for context, he said once that there's nothing worth talking about other than politics and religion. And now today we have built this society for ourselves where the only two things you absolutely cannot ever talk about are politics and religion. And the people who've come before us are going, those are actually kind of interesting conversations. Why can't we just have them? And we're just cutting ourselves off to it. And here's my point. Two things can be true at once. Yes, it is true that our world is resistant to Jesus Christ. But everybody is. The best thing you and I can do in our daily walk with Christ is find the areas where I am resistant to Jesus and try to deal with that. Everybody's resistant to Jesus. Yes, there is resistance out there. But also we can trust Jesus when he says, open up your eyes and see that the field is ripe for the harvest. The Apostle Paul, since we've last seen him, he left Athens and he eventually makes his way to the end of the book. If you have your Bibles, you can open up to Acts chapter 28. And he left there, and in his time, in his ministry, he experienced a great many moments of resistance in his life. He's been pulled in front of the Sanhedrin, the Roman officials, and philosophers. He's been shipwrecked and snake bit and left for dead. He once got stoned in the middle of his sermon. Not like smoking stone, but like actually had rocks thrown at him. They left him in the street because they thought he was dead, and he got up and he went back. He's like, okay, where was I? Verse 9. And he finished his sermon. And here's when one day he was writing to the Corinthians, and he wrote this, and he said, this is the kind of resistance he had experienced in his ministry. He said, I had been flogged more severely. I've been exposed to death again and again. 5 times I received from the Jews 40 lashes minus 1. They said that because they said if you got 40 lashes, that would just kill anybody. So they always said 40 lashes minus 1 so they can still live and learn from their mistakes. He got that 5 times. 3 times I'd been beaten with rods. Once I was pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I was spent the night and a day at open sea. I have been constantly on the move. I had been in danger from rivers, danger from bandits, danger from fellow Jews, danger from Gentiles, and danger from the city, and danger from the country, and danger at sea, and danger from the false believers. I have labored and I have toiled, and I have often gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst and have gone without food, and I have been cold and naked. Now, thankfully, my ministry has not experienced that kind of resistance. And hopefully, your life has not experienced that kind of resistance either. Every Christian who's ever walked the face of the earth has gotten to this point where they have thought, wow, there's a good bit of resistance out there. There's a good bit of pushback. But here's what I want to notice. I want you to notice as we get to the end of the book of Acts, he's finally in Rome. He's under the guard of the Roman Empire. He is chained to a Roman soldier. He's living in an apartment. And we know from the book of Philippians that these people who are put in charge of guarding him so he doesn't escape are turning to Christ because he's like, hey, I'm going to try out Galatians on you and see how it lands. And he's writing these letters, and these people are becoming Christians. And he's facing all the resistance. The Roman Empire has him under guard, and the guards are becoming Christians. Jesus goes, open your eyes. The field is ripe for the harvest. It may look like you're in chains. It may look like everything's against you, but God is working because we have a Jesus who does amazing things. And now, I don't know if you've ever read the book of Acts. It's an interesting book. You should read it. I hope you read the whole Bible at some point. But if you've not read the Gospels or the book of Acts or some of the epistles, start there, please. Read those. But for me, as a person reading the book of Acts, I've always thought the end of the book of Acts kind of meanders. I thought it just kind of wandered. I don't know what... I've struggled following the plot at the end of... But I think this is what Luke was trying to get to when he's trying to figure out, where do I land this story? And Paul's in jail. He's in an apartment under guard. And he looks back at his time in ministry, and he makes this conclusion. Acts 28:28. He says, therefore, I want you to know that God's salvation has been sent to the Gentiles, and they will listen. When you read the laundry list of things that has happened to him because they're trying to stop him from preaching the message of the gospel, the resistance he's gone through, his summary statement is, you know what? There's a world of people out there who will listen. There's a world of people. And what's fascinating is in this time, I understand, we all feel the resistance, but we also have to remember this. Every single day, every week around the world, there are people right now giving their lives to Christ. It may not be waves of people, but people are giving their lives to Christ. And what we're hoping for as a church is to be part of the body of Jesus who's allowing people to find their way back to God. We're hoping for God to use us to make that happen more. We're asking God to use us to make His mission go further and deeper into our community. That's what we're hoping for. It's happening all over the world, and we're asking God to make it happen here. And because Paul had a different understanding of the situation, he did not spend all his time going, well, it's just nothing but resistance. He's going, no, they will listen. I'm telling you people will listen. I'm telling you people will listen. And this is how he lived out his time in Rome. For 2 whole years, Paul stayed there in his own rented house, welcomed all who came to see him. He proclaimed the kingdom of God and taught about the Lord Jesus Christ with all boldness and without hindrance. Paul's mindset, his understanding of what's actually taking place, gave him boldness. It did not cause him to shrink away. He said, if this is the heaviest thing to lift, I'm going to lift. I'm going to walk right through that door. I'm going to have boldness. And I think that if you and I can get the same mindset as Jesus and as the Apostle Paul, It'll change the way we go to work. It'll change the way we have our neighbors. It'll change the way we go to church. It'll change the way we make friends. It'll change the way we play our sports. It'll change the way we live to where no matter where we go, I'm not saying we're starting conversations everywhere we go. I'm just saying no matter where we go, God, I'm available. I'm available. I'm available. You take care of the rest. And I believe that we'll become a church that is living proof that people will listen. And it's okay if we get stuck in moments where we have to flounder a little bit. It's okay if we have to say, sorry, I don't know an answer to that question. That's a good one, actually. Man, shoot. Actually, I'd kind of like to know that answer, too. I don't know. That's a good one. It's okay to flounder. It's okay to get stuck and have to come back later and say, hey, I put some thought behind that question you asked, and here's my whatever. Because Jesus says that people will listen. There's a moment in my life that is burnt into my memory. It lives in my head rent-free. It's the first day of school at a new school, Richmond Hill Elementary School. I was probably 5 or 6. And I was all amped up. I don't know why this thought was in my head. Maybe my dad was like trying to get me amped up for this. I don't know. But I sat down, first day of school, next to the girl who would be sitting there the entire year at school. So, you got to get this one right. And and I looked over at her and I said, do you go to church? She looked at me and she said, no. And I was not ready for that response. And the amount of shame and rejection that my little body felt at that time, poor little Garrett Huxford getting sent out into the cold of the utter darkness, I don't know how to handle it. That was one of the possible responses I was not ready for. And I did not bring it up again because I, like everyone else, don't like to flounder. I don't like that feeling. It's not fun. And I think you and I all can think through a moment where we felt that feeling right there. And we thought, I ain't doing that again. Not going through that. There was another first day of school. I had several of them. I went through all the grades. And I met a kid who was his first day at our school. It was my junior year. Just a cool 11 years after the last time I did this. And I had to recoup, you know what I mean? I had to whatever. And I find out he's from somewhere else. And in the last day of class, last class of the day, we're sitting down. I met him earlier, got introduced by a friend. And I knew he was new, and I knew he was not from around here, so he's still trying to introduce himself to people. And we sit down in the back of drama class, and I go, do you want to go to youth group with me? And he said, no. And I'm like reeling. I'm like, oh no, I've been here before, PTSD. And I'm like, oh gosh, I don't, I'm like, stumbling. Our drama teacher's talking about something, I'm sure, but who really cared? And and I'm going, why not? And now, he's got to answer that question. I'm like, oh wait, time out. I got some questions I can ask. And he said this, because I don't go to church. And I don't know, it was like, I don't know if you play cards or, whatever, but it was like he put a hit power 99 down. I'm on my last, I'm like dead man walking, you know what I mean? And lights are on, but no one's home. I just got hit with what's proven to be my Achilles heel before. So this is not good, you know what I mean? And then I just throw out this one last Hail Mary. This basically admits that I don't know what else to say at this moment. I go, well, that doesn't matter. And I'm not joking. This guy goes, really? I go, and I got the second wind. I'm like, yeah, of course it doesn't matter if you don't go to church. Every single week is somebody's first week at church. Did you know there are people that don't know they're allowed to just go to church? Did you know that? And so all of a sudden I'm back in it, and he goes, okay, fine. I'll go to youth group with you. That sounds fine. And I go, sweet. And I forgot to pick him up. And that one was bad. I'll admit it. That was on me. I was. He showed. Years later, he told me, he goes, I was like all dressed up or whatever. And I was like, no, Mom, he said he's going to pick me up. I'm sure he's coming. And I didn't. I was like, ah. I saw him the next day at school, and he's like, dude, what happened? You didn't pick me up? And it was just like, just Jeff Daniels seeing the bomb in Speed, you know what I mean? Just like, oh, no, this is not happening. And Nate got the Speed reference, okay. Have y'all seen Speed with Keanu Reeves? Yeah. If not, that's your homework. And eventually I get this guy to church, and we're going. And one day he goes up at the end of youth group. And we just spent the last year and a half being friends. Staying up late at his house, playing video games, eating frozen pizza, swimming in the pool, doing stuff. Like, we've just been friends for a year and a half. And one day he goes up after the youth group, and I'm his ride, so I have to sit there and wait for him the whole time. And I'm in the other room. He walks out and he says, hey, Garrett, I've decided to give my life to Christ. I want you to baptize me. And I go, really? And he's like, yeah. And I'm going, why? I haven't read you the Bible. I haven't preached it. There's a youth pastor over there that's done all these things. I haven't even opened the Bible with you. I've just been, whatever. He goes, Garrett, you've been the most influential person in my spiritual life so far. And all I've done is just been a friend. And I've got to know his family. He got to know my family. He still calls my dad Papa Bear. He's the only one that does. And he's like, it's going to catch on, Garrett. I'm like, I don't think it is. And and I go, okay. And I learned something really interesting about church that day. Something I didn't know, and it's something a lot of people don't understand about church. Churches don't exist so that some pastor can shine. Churches don't exist so some youth pastor who did whatever can take credit for things. The church exists to help people reach their friends in their neighborhoods and their place for Christ. And so when that youth pastor got done saying, all right, it sounds like you're good to get baptized, it sounds like you're really serious about this, he asked a question that I always ask, which is, who do you want to baptize you? Because I'm assuming it's someone other than me. And he came to me. And I got to tell you something. There's a memory that is burnt into my head. It lives rent-free in my mind. Yeah, there's a little girl that rejected me in first grade. That's fine. There's also this other memory. Standing in the baptistry with my best friend. And all the people are out there. And we're right here. And I'm freaking out because there's a lot of people. And then I look up on the wall, hidden behind this corner, and I see this giant Post-it note with giant handwritten letters that says, I believe, pause. That Jesus is the Christ, pause. And I go, oh, thank the Lord. That's how people don't forget. Okay, goodness, because I'm in the water and I forgot to bring notes. I didn't know anything. I was I'm already out of my depth. And I'm like, oh, good. And I lead them through the good confession as a high schooler. It's one of these moments I'm just so grateful I've gotten to experience. And I dip them in, and the guy floats. And I'm like, no. I've already experienced more resistance than this today, all right? So I'm pushed him in. I'm like, I said I baptize you. And I got him underwater. It happened. And I just got to tell you something. We dried off, and we got done, and we went back into the service. We were sitting down and finishing the sermon, and I'm sure my dad was talking about something, but who really cares? And I remember thinking, wow, this has been quite a ride. This has been quite a year and a half. Being friends, just being there, just being available, and letting God do the rest. And I remember thinking, the Great Commission, Jesus says, go into all the world and baptize them and make disciples and teach them to obey. And we call it the Great Commission, where we are on mission with Jesus. And I remember thinking that day, I go, oh wait, when Jesus commissions us to this, He's not commissioning us to a life of drudgery. He's commissioning us to something that can be described as quite a ride. As an adventure that I didn't know I had in store for me. I guess what I'm saying is, the water is great. Jump on in. The fields are ripe for the harvest. Let's go be available to them. The world is hurting and in need of a Savior. Let us be a church with open arms to bring them into the life and the salvation of Jesus. The water is great. Let's jump in. And this is why, by the way, I want all of you to show up at this creative team meeting, where we can just kind of say, let's just throw ideas out there. And I'll just kind of, from my own personal use, I'll kind of flip through them in the future and say, oh, well, actually, that was a better idea than I thought it was at the time. Let's try this. Because I think there's some creative ideas on how we can get ourselves into our neighborhoods or our places of work or whatever that just are not at the top of our mind. We have to dig a little deeper, I think. And I would love if our church could come through for you as you invite your friends and your neighbors to church, just like my home church came through for me when I invited my friend to church. You know, one of the things that I do, if you do, finally get one of your friends or neighbors to church, I try to get people to fill out a Connect card. And if they give me their address, I send them a card in the mail and say, hey, thanks for being here, and I give them a gift card to a coffee shop. Just say thank you. That's all I'm doing. I'm not trying to put you on anything. I'm just trying to say, hey, here you go. And a lot of you are looking here going, wow, I never got a gift card. It's because you didn't turn in a Connect card. We just want to help you be there. So we want to come through for you as you're bringing your friends in, trying to introduce them to Christ, just like churches have always helped their people. Be there for them when their friends show up. And so that's what we're hoping for. We're hoping to be a church that's available, that understands evangelism and conversion so that we can help people walk through it. We're hoping to be a church that speaks the language of our world so we can start where they are and lead them to the gospel. And quite frankly, we're hoping to be a church that's bold. A church that has the willingness to say, God, whoever you send, however it happens, come on, I'm available. And so as we finish this and we move into the fall, I'm going to ask us to stand. In a couple of minutes, we're going to stand and we're going to finish in a time of prayer. I'm going to bring Darren, one of our elders, up here to help with it. But last year when we moved into this building, we all had a rock on the way in. And we put a table up here and we said, one of those great fortunate things for us, we moved into this building the week that our sermon series on Joshua was about Israel crossing the Jordan into the promised land. It was one of those wonderful pieces of timing that I didn't have anything to do with. And we all had a rock, and we said, let's just take a moment and remember, how has God come through for you? How has God made good? How has He been good to you in your life? And don't forget it. And then we all came, and we piled them up on this table here, and we had this pile of rocks, symbolizing the memories that each of us have of how God has come through for us. And now I want us to take that a next step. I don't ever want us to forget how God has come through for us, but I also want that to change us into being bold people who are willing to leave this world, leave this church building, and reach our world for Christ.